Our Across the Aisle segment tonight. This morning, Senate Republicans released their Obamacare repeal plan. And right on cue, Democrats are losing their minds. Democrats don't want to talk about policy. They want to scare people. And you can't blame them. Obamacare has been such a massive failure, not even they can defend it with a straight face. Watch.
This is a bill designed to strip away health care benefits and protections from Americans who need it most in order to give a tax break to the folks who need it least. This is a bill that would end Medicaid as we know it, rolling back Medicaid expansion, cutting federal support for the program even more than the House bill.
You know, as the president called the House bill mean after celebrating its passage, he then changed to saying it's mean. He said that he hopes the Senate bill will have heart. So sad, Mr. President. Heartless, mean and heartless.
Joining me now, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins. Michael, good to see you.
Hey, it's always good to see you, Liz.
All right, Michael, these are the words that I've seen used by Democrats today to describe the Republicans' health care bill. Heartless, people will die, doom and gloom, euthanasia for people older than 75. You heard Chuck Schumer on the floor in Congress today saying that this was an effort to strip people's health care. I mean, come on, Michael, I know that you're liberal, I know that you're Democrat, but you have to admit this hyperbole, it really is bordering on ridiculous.
You know, I'll use the president's own words. The president said that this bill was mean. So if the president said that the House bill was mean, I would say that the Senate bill is downright cruel. You know, the president spent all of the campaign season saying that he wouldn't strip away Medicaid for the people who need it the most. This bill over 10 years strips away almost $1 trillion in Medicaid and uses that money to fund tax breaks for the rich. That's just a fact. And so, you know, it's nice to see that some Republicans have already come out and said that they won't support this bill, because we can come to a bipartisan route of fixing Obamacare. But this isn't going to be it.
Listen, I don't know if there is a bipartisan solution now. I don't mean to sound cynical, but when it comes to the point of hyperbole, where both parties are accusing the other party of purposely inflicting death on people, I don't know how you bridge that gap. If they truly believe that, and it's not just performance art by members of Congress, if Democrats truly believe Republicans are trying to kill people, and Republicans truly believe that Democrats don't care about the people they claim to champion, I'm not sure that there is a way to actually compromise on that. But let me ask you, Democrats constantly talk about the number of people who are going to potentially, I guess, lose their coverage, whether it's Medicaid, rollbacks, or otherwise. But how many people, Michael, lost their health care plan under Obamacare?
Well, in fact, when Obamacare was implemented, we've seen the most amount of people covered by health insurance in our nation's history. Under Obamacare, we added almost 30 million people to the rolls. And under this new legislation, we're going to see about 23 million people taken off the roll.
Sure, I've heard those points before. I've heard the points, but that's not my question. My question is, Democrats claim that 23 or 24 million Americans could potentially lose their health insurance under this bill. That's a claim made by the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. But my question is, after Obamacare was passed and signed into law, how many Americans were kicked off of the health care plans that they were on?
As a net average, people were added. I'm sure there were some people who lost their health care, but they were able through their states, if their states offered, or through the federal government, they were able to find health care.
Wait a second.
There's a reason that Obamacare now is at almost an 80% approval rating.
Wait, why don't you know that number? Why don't Democrats know that number, though? I mean, your primary defense of Obamacare is that 20 million people were covered and that if we repeal it, 24 million people will lose their coverage. I mean, you're very interested in the numerics of the whole thing. Why don't Democrats know the number of people who were kicked off, told by Obamacare that their plans weren't good enough and that they had to leave? Why don't you know that number?
Because the number specifically, it's hard to determine how many people were kicked off, because when you look at the state rolls versus the federal rolls, people who may have lost their insurance due to state rolls could have been added through their employer, could have been added through the federal roll. And so it's one of those shifting numbers that, let's just be honest, there's no way of really knowing.
There is. It's 30 million. 30 million Americans were told that they had to leave their health insurance plan. We're not talking about the number of people who had recourse, because that's the same as the potential 24 million. They might lose their plans, but they'll have other options too, if that number is accurate. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I don't understand why Democrats are so concerned with the potential of 24 million, but they're not concerned at all with the 30 million Americans who actually did, in real life, lose their health insurance because of Obamacare.
Because I don't know how that number could be possible. When you look at what the CBO says and what Health and Human Services Department said, we're at an all-time high for people being insured. So for us to lose 30 million people but still be at an all-time high, those numbers don't really add up. But what we can do is actually look at the statistics and look at the numbers in this bill.
Right.
This bill is going to raise the cost of premiums for elderly, and it's going to take away health insurance credits for the sick. Without an individual mandate, there's no way to balance the cost.
Right. Let me ask you something. That's the second thing Democrats do is they always pivot directly to the CBO. They say, oh, it's nonpartisan, it's not biased. They don't have any political interest. You know, their predictions have been correct. But let me ask you, the CBO issued a prediction on Obamacare back in 2010. Was that prediction accurate?
I'm not sure. I mean, the CBO has issued multiple scores during the passage of Obamacare.
Sure, so and that's an important number to know. They predicted in 2010, by the end of 2016, that there'd be 21 million people that had been added to Obamacare. But at the end of 2016, the Department of Health and Human Services reported that only 10.4 million Americans had actually been added, had actually gained coverage through Obamacare. That's less than half. Their prediction wasn't even close. It was over 100% wrong here. So why would we pivot? Why would we use the CBO as a credible source when historically about healthcare they've been wrong?
Because when the CBO score was done, it accounted to the fact that there would be shared credits, that governors wouldn't stop Medicaid from being used for Obamacare, when in fact, most governors, Republican governors, blocked Medicaid funding, didn't allow shared tax credits, and actually didn't use the advertising money, which would allow individuals to know that they were eligible to sign up for health care.
Right, so what you're saying is the CBO is not very good at their job because they didn't take into account the variables that they needed to make an accurate prediction. So why would we trust them to do that now?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's my point. Why would we trust them to do that now if they didn't do it in the past?
The CBO expected that the governors in Republican states would do their jobs. Instead of doing their jobs, people like Rick Scott decided to politicize people's health care, people's actual safety. Because at the end of the day, healthcare is national security. If we don't have healthy Americans, then there's no way to secure the nation. And so, that's something that both Republicans and Democrats can agree that we've got to come to some sort of consistency.
Both Republicans and Democrats agree that under Obamacare, premiums have gone up, in some places as high as 116%. Deductibles are so high we can't even reach them, so we're paying out of pocket for our medical care, which we can't afford. Our religious freedom has been infringed by the mandates. We're told that we have to purchase a product that we don't necessarily want, or we have to pay a penalty, which is unconstitutional. Small businesses have been put out of business because of these things. It's a disaster. And I mean, to me, it's obvious that Democrats can't actually defend this because they pivot immediately to hyperbole when they're talking about the Republican plan. Michael, I wish we could debate this for the next half an hour,
defending it.
But they're yelling at me in my ear. I gotta go. I'll talk to you next week.